everyone. Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, February the 3rd, 2026. I hope you all survived Groundhog Day yesterday and made it out of February the 2nd circle forever. And I want to talk about today. I was hoping that Anna would come, and she may still. I would really love for her to be able to describe to you her list of 50 projects that she has actively going on right at this moment, so that we all have a better understanding of all the things that the Federation at this point is juggling on their plate, and that Anna has to begin to really work on and help get funded. And the funds are really low. So I will tell you that if your state assembly or you can find a little bit that you can take and donate to Anna, that it would be greatly appreciated to donate to her through her various sources. So one of those is through paulstramer.net. The Ohio Assembly also has a couple of donation buttons on their website that ultimately go to Shannon Bookie. You just need to put a note on that it's for Anna. And I know that there are some other donation areas that you can go to, maybe through the TASA site, not sure. But Anna can always accept mail, even though it's snail mail, she can accept mail. If you write a check, make sure that check doesn't have a to name on it, so that it can be cashed by whomever she decides needs that amount. So just realize that without those projects, it's going to be slower to get some of those things through, noticed. In case you haven't noticed, mail has gone up substantially again. And sending her notices to the government and things, or to the Treasury, becomes really slowed down by the lack of donations. So please keep that in mind as you think about it. Talk to your assemblies. If every assembly could afford $100 every month, that'd be $5,000 a month for Anna. If they could do $200 a month, it'd be $10,000 for Anna. So, please think about how small donations can really make a large impact to the work of the Federation. So today I wanted to talk about, in Anna's absence, and if she shows up, we'll switch topics back. But I wanted to talk about the roles of our various liaisons. Because as our assemblies begin to develop and stand, which we just had another assembly go into full standing and hopefully seatment soon, is Louisiana. So congratulations, Louisiana. And that makes 4. And hopefully soon we'll have Arkansas on board. They're next in line, I think. And that will make 5. So, keep working on those states' assemblies, getting them stood and in place so that we can continue our mission on in the international space. So today I want to talk a little bit about that international space and our liaisons, because as we develop, it's going to be important that we're able to still communicate back and forth between ourselves and the Federation and the international jurisdiction. So let's talk about some of our first liaison, and that's basically the coordinator for your state assembly. They really do act as the liaison between your state assembly and the Federation. Yes, they have a little bit more of a job than maybe normally any of the other liaisons have. And they're really watching over the process of how our assemblies are forming to make sure that they follow Anna's guidelines and her articles on building your state assembly. Now, realize that our state assemblies are supposed to be comprised by committees. We are a government by committee. That way, all of our people have a voice within our assemblies. And so our liaison, our coordinators should be making sure and fostering the use of those committees in the various ways. Now, if you go back to some of the very early America Some Assembly required, you will go into, I think, in probably about episode 5 or 6, we start with the various committees of our assemblies. And each of our assemblies, our General Assembly and the sub-assemblies, the General Assembly, the Militia Assembly, and our International Business Assembly, all have committees. And those committees actually do the business of the state in their various capacities. And so our coordinators need to be encouraging people to join. And as they get to know the people, as their status corrected and they come into our assemblies, they should be kind of trying to help them, guide them into committees where they can thrive, where they can share their experience and their knowledge and put their skills, their lifetime of skills, to work. That's really the job of our coordinators. They're there to answer questions and be able to, if they don't know the answers to those questions, take those questions back to the Federation to be answered, either in writing from Anna or, maybe that she includes it on one of her podcasts. We're on the coordinator calls that happen on Thursday evening. So our coordinators are there to help our assemblies grow, to make sure that we're lawfully assembling, that we are there to get our committees up and working, that those committees have what they need in the beginning. A lot of our assemblies, may not have to begin with anyone identified to, say, for example, be a chairman pro tem. And so that is the job of the coordinator, to continue to look for, basically, identify who would make a good chairman pro tem or eventually chairman for your assembly, who would make a good treasurer, who would make a good marshal at arms, who's going to be a good ombudsman, who might be your next militia director or militia commander. So they're kind of there as a talent scout in many ways, to be able to begin to really help your assembly develop in those ways and identify those people. Now, as our assemblies continue to grow, those coordinators, they can be on committees. They're going to be there to, continue to answer questions and form things, bring articles from Anna that are pertinent to each of the committees, so they really have a good idea what the business of their assembly and how they're assembling really does go. And if there's any issues or any problems with the questions that are coming up and they don't know the answer or can't find the answer on Anna's articles, then it's their job to go and ask those questions and make sure that they get good lawful answers, and follow through on those lawful answers. It's not a pick or choose for the coordinators. They have to present the information in its form to the assembly so that the people decide. I will tell you that Ohio has a wonderful coordinator, probably the best in the world, as I always tell him, because that's exactly what he does. And then he steps out of the way and lets the committees really work. He lets the assembly work. And if there's at any time he has a need to step in and kind of remind or course correct, he will do that in a way that says, are you sure about that? Can you check the details on that? I think there's an article that speaks to that and allows the people to learn and grow in the way that our assembly organically needs to do to be successful. So that's the job of the coordinator who acts as liaison to our to the Federation, to Anna, and to the various other coordinators. It's not their job necessarily to arrange meetings. Yes, they can call a meeting, but it's not their job to necessarily do that. It's really up to the assembly to do that. And so as your assembly begins to develop, your General Assembly chairman can call for a meeting. The General Assembly chairman, the Militia Assembly chairman, your International Business Assembly chairman can call for a meeting, as well as your coordinators. But, if we go back to the philosophy, and Anna has several articles on this, it's really the people who are in charge. Remember, she asked that famous question one November, hey, who's in charge? And she said, we should all be answering, we are. Which means that if there's sort of more or less a quorum or, a majority of our people who wish to meet, our coordinators really are supposed to be there to help coordinate and facilitate that meeting, especially with a marshal at arms, to make sure that that meeting stays peaceful and productive. Okay. So when we talk about the liaisons, each one has a little bit different specific job. Once your assembly stands up and it's seated, we're talking about maybe a year to 18 months from when you first really populate your public offices. Then the coordinator can transition at that time to just a simple liaison. You're always going to have someone to need to be able to stay in contact with the Federation. And as we develop, you get more and more contact with the different and various aspects of what our Federation will eventually organize into as well. So with that, they can stay coordinator. They could step down and appoint, or have someone else step up to be a liaison. And when the assembly needs to reach out to the Federation, you've got someone who can do that. Now, if you've got a publicly elected chairman, so can the chairman reach out and speak to the Federation, because the chairman's job is dual. They're both chairman of the assembly. They watch over, make sure the assembly is moving through with its processes and its procedure and its business, but they also speak out into other areas. So that could be your assembly chairman as well, who speaks for your assembly to the Federation. A couple ways to do it. So there's not any one particular way. The second set of liaisons that we've been introduced to was our assembly liaison, or our militia liaison to the peacekeeping task force of the Federation. So that liaison is a state national who builds the bridge between our militia, and if needed at any time during a disaster, during a time of strife would reach out to the Federation PKTF for coordination, maybe with other states. In that time of if there's ever that type of a disaster, or if we would ever have to defend our borders, our militia is going to be extremely busy doing those things, saving lives, preserving peace, and doing that. So a liaison to the Federation makes sense in the fact that they're going to go and they're going to carry the message from our militia directors or commanders to the peacekeeping task force. Now, I know when they were first introduced, a lot of people felt like they were going to be snitches from our state assembly militias to the Federation PKTF. And our liaisons need to be careful about the information that they carry. They're not there to be tattletales. They're not there to be the snitches everybody originally felt that they might become. But they're there to help coordinate between our state and the Federation when the state militia has asked them to do so, right? And that's the important piece in that maybe some of the liaisons are not necessarily aware of is it is when the assembly has them speak regarding something that is going on, or a question that they have, or a resource they might need, or the coordination that comes with it. PKTF has been specifically chartered. And so that's going to become, something that takes that from our state assembly, our state militia, to our Federation peacekeeping task force when there is a need, right? So who determines that need? Well, basically your militia director or commanders in coordination and cooperation with their militia are going to determine when there is that need. Okay. So it's not a position where it's just run off and tell tales. It is a position where, just like the chairman of your assembly, you have a duty to actually present information and or questions in a responsible manner. Okay. And at that time, remember that you've got jurisdictional issues going on. The state is its own jurisdiction. It has boundaries, jurisdiction being spoken law or the language of law. And so there's boundaries that go with that as well. And so our liaisons have to remember that, because they go from our state in its state authority to an international jurisdiction. And that international jurisdiction cannot intrude upon the state without the state's permission. Now that would go back to the militia assembly, possibly even go back into the General Assembly at that point. So there's some real important distinctions in jurisdiction that we need to make within our liaisons. Now, the next liaison that comes up on kind of on the scope is a coordinator between our state, and once our states have assembled and are seated and standing and seated, we may choose to go ahead and start helping our counties develop. And when we do that, we're going to be helping those counties get a coordinator and vet that coordinator and start to have that coordinator work on those counties. Again, there is a boundary around our counties. What happens in the county isn't necessarily something that the state can do a whole lot about. Now, if they chose to adopt to go to another state, now that's something they can do something about. Because that county land belongs to the state. So within their soil jurisdiction, though, the county can run its law. And hopefully they run that court and that law in pretty much the same way that the state courts do. It's one of the reasons why we put state courts up first. It kind of provides that model for our counties to do. And the coordinator is there to kind of help get the county formed in the same way the state coordinator is there for from the federation to get the county coordinated. It's there to communicate any early needs or questions that the county might have, and go to and from the state, or to and from the federation at times. They really should kind of try to follow within their state and their state assembly, since that's the one that's really protecting them in international jurisdiction. So there's another liaison that happens between. Then eventually, between our county units of militia and the state militia, you're going to find that there are also liaisons that go on that help communicate between those county units of the state militia, because counties don't have their own militia. They're always units of the state militia. But those liaisons will communicate the any of the needs, questions, developments then to their state militia. Okay, so we've always got this cross communication going on. And if you remember back into one of the first sessions of America Some Assembly Required, we talked about the founding principles of our state assemblies. And within those founding principles of the state assembly, communication was the number one founding principle that we are required to follow. Okay, without communication, we fail, and you can never over communicate within your assemblies, within the different jurisdictions of your assemblies, between the different areas of your assembly and the state assembly, or the state assembly and the federation. I know bad news travels fast, but we should flip that script and make good news travel faster, right? We need to make sure that we are communicating so that that good news gets spread throughout our state and into our federation. Okay. So within that, we have to remember that the roles of our liaisons, that they are not there to tell tales, but they're there to ask questions, bring back information, and present any learning that they may find in different jurisdictions back to our state assemblies. So, and to our county assemblies eventually. And we need to make sure that we're hitting and talking with those liaisons. Now, you can do a lot of other kind of, not necessarily liaisons, but within your assembly and the communication model, your chairman could regularly get together, chairman of committees, with your chairman of your state assembly. And they could discuss any issues they're having in their committees, any questions they might have going forward, or any desires for education that they may need. That's, again, communication, liaisoning between the different levels or different areas of your state assembly. And when we communicate within our state assembly effectively, then it becomes this open bridge between all of us that we can continue to make our assembly stronger and stronger. So as we go forward here, we want to be able to talk about and talk with our liaisons and make sure that they understand the jurisdictions that they're going to represent in their communication, that they are in tune with the assembly and how the assembly works. Your liaison needs to be really involved in your assembly business, whether that's their militia assembly business or it's general assembly business, they need to be involved and got their, their ear to the ground or their thumb on the pulse, so that they really comprehend how the assembly works, what the challenges are, what kinds of things are needed to be resourced and communicated, right? So I don't know if anybody has questions about that. If you've got questions, put them in the chat, put them in all caps, and let's open it up for questions, and hopefully we can get some questions and answers going. Otherwise, it's going to be a very short show. No questions. So who can qualify for being a liaison? Well, any ASN can raise their hand to be a liaison. And they have to be an ASN because you're crossing jurisdictional boundaries in terms of going from state to county, state to federation, and back and forth. So our liaisons are always ASNs, meaning that they can't be holding any other office and be a liaison as well. So that might be one question you might have had. Any others? What are the 4 standing states? Well, Ohio was first, Virginia was second, Tennessee is third, and Louisiana is fourth. I anticipate very soon that Arkansas will be standing as well. Okay. Okay, I'm going to show this question. Is it imperative to be within the assembly as a committee lead and work with other ASNs as they structure what is needed? So, absolute, our committees function as a subset of our assemblies. You can't have a committee way out here on the edge who just turns around and a group that decides they're going to be a committee and they're coming in. So the assembly really should identify, well, we're going to set up a communications committee. We're going to set up a process and procedures committee. And that's decided in your General Assembly. And then what happens is anybody can raise their hand to be on that committee, but it stems from the assembly in which that committee is rooted. So there could be a General Assembly committee that pops up. And we have a list of standing committees. Those committees are kind of the basic committees. You could have a subset of those committees, a subcommittee. You could officially put together an additional committee. So, for example, when we began the Ohio Assembly, and we started out and we had our outreach committee and our education committee, we had a treasury committee, and then that developed into having a education committee, an orientation committee, then into our oversight committees, our election committees, and those things began to develop, and as we began to blossom and bloom and learn. Can we just have a committee that just hangs out here and suddenly decides they're a committee and they're going to come back and more or less raid the General Assembly? No, that's not how that works. The General Assembly is the one that sets those committees. Remember, our General Assemblies are the agreement of all the people. If all the people agree we need that committee, And someone should be forthright to be able to come to the General Assembly and say, hey, we need a committee that can help us with writing processes and procedures. Hey, we need to open the committee for oversight. Hey, we need an education committee. Okay. And so that's how it's structured through the committee. And then those committees can have subcommittees that break out from those committees if the need arises. Okay. Got enough people on your committee. Maybe it's a special research committee of that committee. Okay. So that's kind of the way our committees develop. But realize that there are some standing committees that need to be really dealt with on our assemblies. And generally what you're going to find is some of those subset committees that people want to do are within the general category of those other committees. Okay. I hope that answers your question. All right. Okay. Is this correct? The members of the General Assembly vote the standards in, but the Marshal at Arms ensures the standards are followed. That is correct. So it is up, and if they aren't followed, it's up to the Marshal at Arms to call that out and either take that to the oversight committee, or, if it's minor infractions and you have a decorum, then, depending on how your decorum is written, your Marshal at Arms can recommend a discipline to the assembly when those standards are not followed. And then the assembly would more or less affirm that timeout or course correction as well. So I hope that kind of helps. Okay. All right. Standards as per how the meetings are carried out. Well, generally, that's why we write decorums. Anna has said before, write a decorum, have everybody agree on it. And on the Ohio Assembly, what we do is, as people come into our assembly, we have those people affirm they have received a copy of the decorum. We're not asking them to agree or disagree, right? We're making sure that they are aware of how we operate. If they don't like how we operate, they're going to sit out. But the decorum is agreed on by the entire assembly, all the people on your state who are papered up. Okay. And so that's one way, is the decorum. The second way is the assembly in its early formation should be putting together how an agenda is going to look, what form of agenda you are going to use, what that agenda is going to include. Okay. And then that agenda is pretty much a form that's used right straight down the line. Now, I can tell you, sometimes you get to go in and you're moving along pretty quickly within your meeting. You might skip an item. Somebody's going to say, hey, whoa, look at the agenda. You skipped this. Oops. It happens, right? Not purposefully, but sometimes it's just, as you're going through and you just misread something and go on. So it's really good. And then that way everybody knows what the order of your meetings are, how they're carried out, and in what order you're going to discuss your business. Okay. So that would be, that would be two of the ways that your meetings are carried out. Now, once you decide a decorum, that decorum carries through to all committees as well. Your committees are not separate from your assembly. as evidenced in the last question, right? So committees are always part and parcel of your entire assembly. They can't act out on their own, right? So anything that's adopted is adopted in that way. Now, does that mean that the committees have the same agenda as one of the assemblies? No. But they should at least have some kind of an idea or some kind of an agenda listed. And that agenda could be, today we're going to discuss this, okay? It doesn't have to be, oh, we're going to read the minutes and we're going to do this and we're going to prove the minutes and we're going to do that. It's not necessarily Robert's rules. We don't necessarily follow Robert's rules. You see, the concept of our assemblies is that we're run by committees. Those committees are a little more like the family dinner table with a little structure, okay? Now, if you were around my family when I was a kid, my dad had a topic of the evening he'd throw out at the end of dinner. My mother always would make sure we were done eating, because she said sometimes it fooled with her digestion, sometimes the subjects that went on and the debates that would carry on between that. Okay. I had an oldest brother who could argue the fuzz off of a peach. Okay. And he loved to argue with my father. And sometimes they would take pro and con positions. Sometimes they switched. Okay. But our committees are to look like the family dinner table. They're to look like bringing that information forward, the discussion, the debate that goes on. And then finally, maybe to have that agreement. But when we carry that discussion, our committee chairmans then take the decision of the committee after all of the research and discussion and debate and the decision, and they carry that to the assembly, whether that's the General Assembly or your Jural Assembly. Those meetings look like business because that's what we do, okay? And so those meetings are very business-like, not corporate, but business-like. And our committee meetings are really our family dinner table. They're there. And if you would ever have attended a committee on Ohio, you would find out that's sometimes mixed with a little teasing, a little joke, sometimes inside jokes. Sometimes it's just really a delightful conversation. All right. So, and that's how we get our business done in our committees. Okay. So you don't need to be so rigid in your committees, but your assemblies do need sort of an agenda form that is followed, and you work through that business on the assemblies. Okay. All right. Okay. Jan, what are the duties of the deputy marshals? So are you talking deputy marshal at arms or deputy marshals? Because you're talking about two different jurisdictions there, Jan. So a deputy marshal at arms can be assigned to, attend a meeting in the absence or in the conflict of a marshal at arms having another meeting. And the deputy marshal at arms gets assigned, they could very well be assigned. Eventually your marshal at arms is going to have a contingent that actually sets up security for each of your elected officers. So that deputy could be assigned to a security detail or to the assignment of a security detail. Okay. So a deputy marshal does any of the duties that the marshal at arms assigns them to. So it might be attending a meeting and keeping the meeting decorum. It could be the fact that that deputy marshal goes with a security detail or arranges security details. He might be at the court. You've got several court cases going on. maybe they're in different venues, or in different areas, and you'd want to have a deputy marshal, marshal at arms available in those areas. It really depends, but deputy means they're assigned anything that the marshal at arms at that time may need them to do within the scope of his duties. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, that's kind of what they do. Maybe you've got two meetings going on at the same time, and the deputy marshal's been and the marshal at arms has been requested. So your deputy marshal would attend one meeting, and the marshal at arms would attend the other. Okay, but they are under the authority of the marshal at arms at that point. Okay. All right. Clarify, liaison cannot hold any other office. Well, that's correct. Okay. You can't serve in two different jurisdictions at the same time. So if you are holding office, you can't be an officer of the assembly, and be an ASN at the same time. The only one that can perform that duty is a speaker or chairman. Speaker, okay? It is to be liaison and to be speaker and chairman at the same time. The committee chairman can't be liaisons because they're in their role as a committee chairman. They are an officer of the assembly, an official of the assembly, not an officer. Officers are publicly elected. So they are an officer, an official of the assembly, and they're a citizen. So it has to be somebody who can clear the decks, be just an ASN, who can carry those types of liaison opportunities. Again, it is jurisdictional, so that when they cross those jurisdictions, they are able to cross that jurisdictions without serving any other master. Cannot serve two masters at one time. Okay. Does that help clarify that, Karen? I hope that does. Okay. All right. Role of a bondsman. So you need to go back, Alan, and look at some of our earlier podcasts where we described the General Assembly and the role of bondsman. The bondsman is really there in the court to collect mostly the bonds and account for the bonds, surety bonds, performance bonds, those types of things. There are several different types of bonds that the court can assign. So, it would be best if you went out and looked up what types of bonds a bondsman is responsible for. Anna has some articles on annavonrights.com that will tell you what the role of the bondsman is. And know that your bondsman can be appointed or elected in your General Assembly, okay, within your court. All right. Any other questions? It's going to be a short day today. Anybody? Well, hopefully this really helps you comprehend exactly what types of liaisons we have. The fact that there are always jurisdictions. We always have to know where we are standing, right? What is the boundary for which we have jurisdiction, and where we need to go, what we need to do, and what the qualifications are for us when we speak. When we speak outside of our jurisdiction, we could be trespassing. So we have to be always aware of what our jurisdiction is. I get asked a lot of times to come in and speak to the different assemblies. And my first question is, did your assembly vote to have me come in? Because otherwise, just coming in might be a trespass on the assembly. And so it's important that we know that as we go through this, that jurisdiction really does matter. And there are so many jurisdictions that we have to constantly keep asking ourselves, what jurisdiction am I standing in? Am I standing in the role that I should be and properly presenting in the jurisdiction? Am I allowed to do that? So I always tell everybody that, Ohio has given me permission to speak and talk about the Ohio Assembly and our documents and our processes within the reason of, as long as somebody's not going to use those to sell or their private purposes and things, that's an important thing, that they're not going to just go out and put it on their website and spread it all over the country without people understanding where it came from, what it had to do with, right? So the assembly has more or less said, well, you can go speak about it, and then you can give them documents, right? So we need to, we have to listen to our assemblies. We have to listen to the people. We have to follow the collective will of our people, right? Because we in that way represent them when we liaison. We represent our people. And we have to remember that we may not always love what's going on, but it's our duty, our obligation to our assemblies when we step up to elected positions and or appointed positions to carry the will of our people, because our assemblies are all about our people. The second question you need to ask before where am I standing is, who is in charge? And when those people speak and tell us what we need to speak, that's exactly what we are allowed to speak. Okay. And in some ways we can give our personal opinion, say, I don't exactly agree with this, but this is what the people have said they're going to do. Okay. So we always have to keep that in mind. It's not about us. It's not about some title or role that we have taken on. It's about our people, and the people always come first. Okay. All right. Well, everyone, if there are no more questions for today, I hope that really helps you grasp the idea of your liaisons and how they work, how they're supposed to work, whether you want to call them coordinators, you want to call them liaisons, and that you're beginning to kind of pull your assemblies together, put these things into place, and begin to get yourselves started towards that ultimate goal of the start line called full standing and seatment. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, have a great Tuesday. We will see you in a week. And hopefully Anna will be able to join us. I know she's extremely busy right now with all the financial things that are going on. So have a great week. Make it a great week in your assemblies, and get working, make progress. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.